What if I told you that in a political debate, um, presenting someone with cold, hard facts doesn't just fail to change their mind, but it actually like biologically triggers them to reject the truth even harder?
I mean, it sounds completely backward.
It really does, because we all have this, this romanticized vision of how political discourse is supposed to work. You present your evidence, I present my evidence, we weigh the merits, and the best logical argument wins.
Yeah, the classic debate club scenario.
Exactly. But if you spend like 5 minutes observing any actual political conversation today, whether it's, a debate on TV or just an argument at a family dinner table, you realize very quickly that logic has almost nothing to do with it.
Oh, absolutely nothing.
So we're going to look at exactly why that happens. We are custom tailoring this deep dive for you today to explore a really fascinating piece of source material from Psychology Today.
It's a great article.
Yeah, it's by Dr. T. Alexander Puccio, and it's titled, Why Politics Makes Us Dumber. And the core thesis here is kind of a tough pill to swallow, because we can't just blame our broken political discourse on, the media or corrupt politicians or social media algorithms.
Right. It's a fundamentally uncomfortable truth to confront, honestly. The real culprit is actually our own evolutionary psychology.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. I mean, the ancient Greeks, they mapped out the pillars of persuasion beautifully. You had logos for logic, ethos for credibility, and pathos for emotion. And a healthy discourse really requires all three of those.
Sure.
But looking at modern political systems, pathos hasn't just taken the dominant role. It has actively weaponized our biology to push logic and credibility entirely out of the picture.
Wow.
Yeah, we are basically attempting to run a complex, modern democratic society using ancient biological hardware that was never at any point in human history designed to optimize for objective truth.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that sounds completely counterintuitive on the surface. You would think that as a species, our brains would have evolved to be like perfectly tuned truth-seeking machines.
You'd think so, yeah.
Right. Knowing the actual objective facts of your environment seems like the single most important requirement for survival. If there's a cliff there, you need to know it's a cliff.
Exactly.
But the article points out this massive psychological hurdle we all face, which is this evolutionary battle between identity and truth.
Right. So to grasp why we behave so, well, irrationally in the political sphere, we have to look at the evolutionary calculus our brains are performing in the background.
Okay.
In the grand scheme of human evolution, possessing strictly true beliefs mattered significantly less than simple survival and reproduction.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Consider the classic evolutionary example of a rustling bush on the savannah. If early humans heard a rustle, the ones who assumed it was a deadly predator and ran away, well, they survived.
Even if it wasn't a predator?
Exactly. Even if it was just the wind, which is a completely false belief, there was no evolutionary penalty for that error. They lived to see another day. A false positive was basically harmless.
Right, because the penalty for a false negative, assuming it's just the wind when it actually is tiger, that's death.
Exactly the point. So now, apply that exact same survival calculus to social dynamics. In our ancestral environments, lacking a cohesive group identity carried the ultimate penalty.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. If you consistently challenged the chieftain, or if you constantly pointed out uncomfortable truths that angered the tribe, you would be ostracized.
And in the wild, being cast out of your hunter-gatherer group meant losing access to shared food, warmth, protection.
It was effectively a death sentence. So our nervous systems evolved to treat social exile as a lethal physical threat. Group cohesion and identity weren't like philosophical luxuries. They were a matter of immediate physical survival.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second here. Because if we are naturally wired to ignore objective facts just to maintain our tribal loyalty, doesn't that mean the entire concept of democracy is, well, fundamentally doomed?
That is the big one.
Like, how can any society function if its voters are biologically incapable of evaluating facts?
Well, that is the existential question at the heart of this research. It isn't that we are totally incapable of evaluating facts. It's that doing so requires actively fighting our own physiological stress responses.
Interesting.
Yeah, the article highlights Dan Kahan's 2007 research on a phenomenon called identity protective cognition.
Identity protective cognition.
Exactly. And Kahn's work demonstrates that our brains did not evolve to act as flawless, impartial supercomputers. Instead, they evolved to function as a psychological defense system.
So what happens when we see something we disagree with?
When we are confronted with a new piece of information that threatens the political or social identity we rely on for our sense of belonging, our brain perceives that not as an intellectual puzzle, but as a physical threat. The amygdala fires up. The whole fight-or-flight response is triggered.
So the brain literally views a contrary political opinion the same way it views a physical predator on the savannah.
It's the exact same underlying alarm system. We don't discard the identity that keeps us safe in our social circles. We subconsciously bend, distort, or outright reject the factual information.
Just to stay safe.
Yeah. We would rather warp reality itself than risk the social cost of suddenly standing apart from the herd.
I'm trying to map this onto everyday behavior. And, it sounds incredibly similar to the psychology of a diehard sports fan.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Like, imagine you're sitting in the stadium at the championship game. Your team is down by a single point. There are 10 seconds left on the clock, and the referee makes a highly questionable, arguably mathematically incorrect call that suddenly hands your team the victory.
Right.
As a superfan wearing the jersey and sitting in the home section, you don't stand up and announce to the crowd, excuse me, objectively speaking, upon review of the physics, that was an invalid call and we should forfeit the trophy.
You'd get booed out of the stadium.
Exactly. You scream, you cheer, and you celebrate. Objective reality doesn't matter in that moment, because the only thing that matters is that your team won.
What's fascinating here is that sports analogy maps onto our current political media landscape flawlessly.
Totally.
Oh, completely. When we look at the ecosystem of cable news and political commentary, we see an industry that understands this biological vulnerability and pulls on these exact evolutionary levers.
Just constantly engaging that fight-or-flight response.
Yes. It clarifies why party identity so consistently outweighs any attempt at objective journalism. And it is crucial to emphasize, as Dr. Putio's source material does, that this is a universal human hardware issue. It's not a partisan one.
So it affects everybody equally.
Exactly. Whether a viewer is getting their nightly information from CNN or Fox News, the underlying psychological mechanism is identical. The brain is actively filtering out inconvenient facts in real time to protect the viewer's tribal affiliation.
It's not about discovering what actually happened in the world. It's about making sure your team retains the moral high ground.
Precisely.
But, okay, if our brains are biologically rigged to prioritize this group loyalty over facts, how does that manifest when someone is, forced to state an objective reality?
Yeah.
If I put a microphone in your face and ask you a verifiable question, what happens?
It leads to a fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying phenomenon that researchers call cheerleading.
Cheerleading.
Yeah, this is where our bias transitions from a passive subconscious filter into an active, performative absurdity.
Okay, color me intrigued.
So the article brings up a pivotal 2015 study by John Bullock and his colleagues on partisan bias. They designed a series of experiments where they asked participants strictly factual, verifiable questions about politics and the state of the economy.
Just basic facts.
Right. And what they found was jarring. Participants were actively giving incorrect answers that aligned with their political party's narrative, even when the participants were well aware that those answers were factually wrong.
Wait, pump the brakes. How could the researchers possibly know that the participants knew they were lying? You can't read their minds to see if they genuinely believe the wrong answer or if they're just faking it.
Well, you can't read their minds, but you can change their financial incentives. Yeah, the researchers introduced a brilliant twist to the methodology. They started actually paying the participants money for every mathematically or factually accurate answer they provided.
So cold, hard cash was on the line.
Exactly. And the moment cold, hard cash was on the line for accuracy, something incredible happened. The supposedly intractable, deeply divided views of the Democrats and Republicans in the study suddenly began to converge.
You're kidding.
Nope. The partisan gap shrank dramatically. And then the researchers went a step further. They offered to pay participants a small monetary reward simply for admitting uncertainty.
Like just for saying, I don't know.
Yes, for just checking a box that said, I don't know. When it became financially rewarding to admit a lack of knowledge, the partisan gap narrowed almost completely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Are you telling me that a huge portion of the people engaging in these fierce political debates actually know the underlying facts, but they are willingly lying just to signal loyalty to their political party?
That's what the data suggests, yeah.
If that's true, how much of the incredibly toxic political discourse we see online every single day is just a theater performance for the home team?
The implication of Bullock's research is that a vast majority of what looks like genuine disagreement over underlying facts isn't about the facts at all. It is pure performative signaling.
Wow.
It is the act of raising the flag of your tribe for everyone around you to see. And historically, we really shouldn't be surprised that humans behave this way. Demonstrating unquestioning allegiance to the group has always brought a massive array of social and survival benefit.
Right. And conversely, being the person who constantly points out the uncomfortable truth makes you a pariah. I mean, nobody likes the person at the party who is constantly correcting everyone's grammar or fact-checking their anecdotes.
Yeah. Pointing out inconvenient truths against the wishes of the collective rarely ends well for the individual doing the pointing.
So true.
The article actually cites Socrates as the ultimate historical proof of this dynamic.
Oh, right.
Socrates spent his life questioning the foundational assumptions of his society, exposing their logical flaws, and demanding intellectual honesty. And what was the tribe's response?
They sentenced him to death and forced him to drink hemlock.
Exactly. A society will always attempt to eliminate the truth teller if the truth being told threatens the cohesion of the tribe.
That is so dark.
It is. And as a result, today, under the heavy influence of political tribalism, we fiercely defend logical fallacies and policy positions that we would immediately recognize as absurd in literally any other context.
So the pom-poms are out. We are fully cheerleading for our political team, even if, deep down in our prefrontal cortex, we know we are ignoring the facts.
Right.
But there's a massive cognitive dissonance there. Nobody likes to look in the mirror and think, I am a liar and a mindless follower.
No, definitely not.
We all desperately want to believe that we are rational, independent, smart people. So how does the human brain resolve the guilt of knowing we are ignoring facts?
Yeah.
How do we convince ourselves that we are actually being highly logical?
Well, we invent a sophisticated, logical-sounding excuse for our behavior.
Oh, of course we do.
This brings us to the third major psychological driver outlined in the article, which is motivated reasoning.
Okay, motivated reasoning, what is that?
Once we have biologically committed to cheering for our team, our brain has to dress up that raw tribal loyalty in a costume that resembles logic. The deep dive into this comes from Peterson and Iyengar's 2021 research regarding selective information seeking.
Okay.
Motivated reasoning works by taking the traditional scientific method and flipping it completely upside down. Instead of gathering a wide array of evidence, analyzing it, and allowing that evidence to lead you to a logical conclusion, motivated reasoning starts at the end. We begin with the conclusion. We already want the conclusion that protects our political identity, and then we work backward, painstakingly assembling only the specific arguments and data points that support it.
Oh, man. It is the exact mindset of a defense attorney preparing for a murder trial.
That's a great way to put it.
Like the attorney already knows the absolute non-negotiable outcome they have to reach, right? Their client is pleading not guilty. That narrative is set in stone before they even look at a single photograph.
Yep.
So the attorney scours the evidence backward, cherry-picking only the alibis, the character witnesses, and the ambiguous details that help construct that specific not guilty narrative.
While ignoring everything else.
Exactly. Simultaneously, they completely ignore, suppress, or attempt to discredit the mountain of forensic evidence that points directly to their client's guilt. They aren't engaged in a quest to find the objective truth of what happened on the night of the crime. They are building a highly selective, weaponized case to protect their guy at all costs.
And the troubling reality is that everyday citizens do this constantly when they browse the internet or select their news programs.
We're all our own defense attorneys.
We really are. We selectively seek out information that confirms our prior beliefs, which provides a hit of dopamine, and we actively avoid sources that might introduce cognitive dissonance.
Which just reinforces the bubble.
Yes. Over time, engaging in this repetitive cycle of confirmation creates what Dr. Putio calls intellectual tunnel vision.
Intellectual tunnel vision. That phrase paints a very bleak picture of where this leads.
It perfectly describes a neurological end state, though. Eventually, opposing arguments don't just seem factually incorrect to you, they lose their plausibility entirely.
Like you literally can't comprehend them.
Exactly. You literally cannot fathom the mechanics of how another human being could hold the opposing view, because you have spent years structurally starving your own brain of the context required to understand it.
That's terrifying.
And while everyday citizens suffer from this, The effect is magnified exponentially for actual politicians.
Oh, right, because for politicians, it's not just a matter of feeling good on Twitter. Their actual livelihoods, their mortgages, their entire careers are on the line.
Exactly. For the average voter, the cost of breaking from the tribe is social friction. Maybe an uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner.
Right.
For an elected politician, the reputational and career stakes are astronomical. The financial and professional rewards for staying rigorously on the party-approved message are massive.
Yeah, the risks of deviating.
Well, facing a primary challenger funded by your own party or being immediately cut off by your biggest donors, the risks are severe and immediate. Politicians are structurally and financially incentivized to engage in the most extreme forms of motivated reasoning available.
Which means we are in a situation where we absolutely cannot wait around for politicians or media conglomerates to fix this broken system.
No, they have zero incentive to do so.
Right. The machinery of polarization is just too profitable for them. That means the responsibility falls completely on us, on you, the listener. If we know that our own biological system is rigged against us, how do we actually hack our own hardware?
Well, the source material lays out 3 very specific, actionable steps for reclaiming our cognitive independence.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first step is to actively limit your exposure to what Dr. Putio terms high-identity environments. These are spaces where ideological performance is valued far more than accuracy.
So we're talking about partisan cable news panels, political Twitter feeds, hyper-partisan subreddit communities.
Exactly.
But breaking away from those is incredibly difficult because they are engineered to be addictive.
They are essentially dopamine engines. You have to recognize that these platforms are not designed to educate you or explain the nuance of reality. Their primary function is to capture and monetize your attention by constantly triggering your tribal threat response instincts. Cutting back the sheer volume of time your nervous system is subjected to these environments is the mandatory first step. You cannot de-escalate your amygdala while you are still standing in the middle of a screaming crowd.
That makes total sense. It's like trying to solve a complex calculus equation while someone is blasting an air horn in your ear.
Perfect analogy.
You have to take yourself out of the locker room first.
And that requirement for quiet leads directly into the second step, which is creating intellectual distance.
How do we do that?
If you genuinely want to discover what you believe about a complex issue, you have to stop skimming aggregated headlines and consuming what the article calls rage bait.
Oh, rage bait. It's everywhere.
It is. And it's meticulously engineered by algorithms to make you angry, reactive, and ready to fight. Instead, you need to transition to reading deeply. Find long-form books, peer-reviewed journals, or thorough investigative reporting on topics that pique your curiosity. Give your brain the physical time and the quiet space required to process complex, multi-layered information without the crushing pressure of needing to instantly post a social reaction.
Okay, so step 1 is fixing our media diet by getting out of the high-identity echo chambers. Step 2 is embracing long-form, thoughtful content to build intellectual distance.
Correct.
But we don't live in a vacuum. We still have to go to work, attend family gatherings, and interact with other human beings, many of whom are still fully entrenched in their own motivated reasoning.
Oh, absolutely.
So how are we supposed to handle conversations with people who are actively operating across the political divide?
This brings us to the third and undoubtedly the most difficult piece of advice from Dr. Putio. When you engage in conversation with others, you have to fundamentally shift the goal of the interaction.
Shift the goal how?
You must abandon the desire to win the argument and instead focus entirely on trying to understand why someone might arrive at a conclusion that you find completely absurd.
That sounds really hard.
It is. The article uses a stark hypothetical to illustrate this. Imagine someone is arguing a point as clearly faulty as claiming 2 + 2 = 5. Your primary goal in that interaction should still be to understand the premise and the underlying anxieties that led them to that math.
So what does this all mean? Like, what does this actually look like in practice? Because I know a lot of people listening are probably screaming at their steering wheels right now thinking, if someone is standing in front of me aggressively arguing that 2 + 2 = 5, isn't it my moral and intellectual duty to correct them?
It feels like it should be.
Right. Why is shifting the goal from winning to understanding so vital? Shouldn't I just show them the correct math and demand they acknowledge objective reality?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, aggressively correcting them is actually the worst possible strategy.
Really?
Remember Dan Kahan's study on identity protective cognition? If you attack their math, if you try to dominate the conversation, win the debate, and prove them intellectually inferior, their brain does not process that as a helpful math lesson.
It perceives it as a threat.
Yes, their brain perceives a lethal social attack. Their defensive walls will instantly slam down, their amygdala will flare, they will rapidly engage in motivated reasoning, and they will dig their heels into the 2 + 2 = 5 narrative even deeper just to spite you.
Wow. So trying to fix it makes it worse.
You will achieve absolutely nothing except a dramatic increase in mutual polarization.
By trying to forcefully shove the truth down someone's throat, you are actively triggering the exact biological mechanism that ensures they will reject it.
Exactly. You become a participant in the locker room brawl rather than a citizen fostering the amphitheater.
That is a great way to frame it.
But if you change your posture and genuinely seek to understand how they arrived at their conclusion, you de-escalate their biological threat response. You create an environment where their brain no longer feels under attack.
Which opens the door for actual conversation.
Right. And it is crucial to remember that understanding an argument doesn't mean you have to accept it or validate faulty math. You can fully comprehend someone's perspective while still disagreeing with it.
Of course.
But the moment you abandon the attempt to understand others, you step right back into the ancient evolutionary traps that drive the broken system in the first place.
That reframing changes the entire dynamic of how we should interact with each other. So to pull all of these threads together for you listening, the grand takeaway from this deep dive isn't a cynical one.
Not at all.
The lesson isn't that half the population is naturally malicious or fundamentally stupid or actively trying to ruin society. It's that we're all, every single one of us, fighting a constant battle against our own ancient evolutionary wiring.
We are fighting biology.
We really are. We are biologically programmed to choose the warmth and safety of our tribe over the cold, hard, isolating facts. But by recognizing those moments when we are simply cheerleading for our team, by actively stepping away from algorithmic rage bait, and by prioritizing true, empathetic understanding over the cheap thrill of winning a debate, we can actually shortcut the system.
Excise.
We can override our ancestral programming and become genuinely, thoughtfully well-informed citizens.
This journey raises a profound question, though, and it's something I think is absolutely worth mulling over as you go about your day.
I love these. Let's hear it.
Our brains evolved to prioritize social belonging over objective reality because in the harsh environment of the wild, that was the ultimate survival strategy.
Right.
But we no longer live in the wild. We are rapidly transitioning into a modern era utterly dominated by customized, algorithm-driven echo chambers.
Yeah, we are.
These digital algorithms are infinitely patient, highly advanced, and perfectly designed to cater entirely to our specific identities, feeding us endless streams of validating information. As these systems become more deeply integrated into our daily lives, will finding objective truth eventually become biologically impossible for the human brain to process?
Oh, wow.
Or will the intense crisis of modern polarization force the next great stage of our cognitive evolution?
That is an incredibly terrifying yet entirely thrilling thought experiment. Are we going to evolve past the locker room, or are we going to build algorithms that trap us inside it forever? That is definitely something to think about the next time you feel your blood pressure spiking over a provocative news headline. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Remember to keep questioning your own assumptions, actively seek out understanding, and we'll catch you on the next one.